like new construction, there's only a small component that's around sustainable sites, right? Reducing parking, and not building on a green field, et cetera. But for San Francisco, they actually have like 66 measures that any new development they have to have. I can't remember. It's probably dependent on how large the development is, but X number of measures they have to implement that promote TDM in that new development.
Interesting.
So, I mean, it can be like decoupling parking cost and, that kind of thing, but this is definitely kind of like the gold standard that cities can do. But, City of Austin has a TDM manager. When I left San Antonio, they were hiring their first TDM manager. So you really need someone kind of at that level seeing what's happening at the city. You need folks embedded in the organizations and large organizations and oil and gas companies working on this because they know the employee base. Yeah. And I even brought my first kind of TDM report for Rice. And a lot of it's just kind of analyzing where your employees live. If you work in a LEED building, basic TDM thing is a commuter survey, but the property manager probably sends that out, doesn't really do much with it, and it just sits there, and you do that annually, but it's not anything that's really useful.
It's not being leveraged. So that's a great example of something that is being done if you're LEED building, but maybe isn't being leveraged to the full extent.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you, Lisa. Let me ask Dylan, so as a power generator and a retail electric provider, what opportunities does electrification of transportation pose for NRG?
Sure. I think electrification overall poses a huge opportunity for NRG. Use more electricity. We will sell it to you. So we're really paying attention very much to the overall trend of electrification. The electrification of transportation is really interesting to us, and we're just now really getting our arms around what it could mean. We are a member of a couple of working groups of Evolve. A colleague of mine is handling that, who is a Tesla owner who actually drove her Tesla from New Jersey to Texas when she moved here. So she is like, she really understands the personal experience of owning and using an EV. But really, we're looking at, a company like CenterPoint has infrastructure that they can pretty straightforwardly deploy in order to create a system in the Houston area and in the other, areas where the CenterPoint works that can literally bring to life an EV network. NRG is more of a kind of a last mile provider. So what we're looking at is ways that we can provide sustainable energy solutions to that last provider piece. So when we actually used to own EVgo, so it's a confusing example. We no longer do. We have a strange arrangement with EVgo. Love them, miss them very much. But if we were to contract with EVgo to sell them electricity, sustainable electricity, let's make it pollution-free electricity, let's make it renewable electricity for all of their stations around the country. There's a lot of confusion around how that would work. The regulatory environment around power is really confusing. So it's not as simple as say, like, hey, ChargePoint, want to buy electricity from us? Here's the price. It's just it's a huge mountain of regulatory paperwork. So we're working on it. In the meantime, super into it, and we're getting literally daily interest from our CEO, our heartthrob CEO, about how we can really jump into this with both feet. So pretty excited about it.
Interesting. Well, I know we could talk even longer about transportation, but I'm going to move us to the third topic so we have enough time to take your questions. I'm sure there will be a lot of good ones. And before I do that, I'll just say if we put little note cards, a blank note card on all of your seats for your questions. If you don't have a pen, Danya has a box of pens to pass around. If you want to just raise your hand, Danya will come around and give you a pen. But please write your questions down, and then we'll be collecting them to do Q&A after this last topic. So, topic 3, science-based targets. So the third trend is from the report is actually that science-based targets look beyond carbon. But first, let me explain what science-based targets are. So SBT, science-based targets, are greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets that help companies align with the 2 degrees Celsius Paris goal, which is, if you're not familiar, that goal is the goal of keeping the global average temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius. So targets are adopted by companies that aim to reduce their fair share of emissions relative to their size and their sector and several other factors. So from the GreenBiz report, in relatively little time, science-based targets became the gold standard for companies, cities, and others seeking to establish credible goals for reducing their contributions to climate change. So in a word, they're essentially globally accepted GHG reduction targets. So in 2019, there are over 500 companies committed to science-based targets. And while the trend in the report actually discusses how SBTs are starting to look at other factors, other natural resources like water, we wanted to just look at them in general as they are now. So these questions really go to Dylan because NRG was one of the first 10 companies globally to commit to a science-based target, which they did in 2014, announced in 2015. So what were some of the drivers behind NRG's decision to go public with science-based targets?
Sure. Does anybody work for a company that has an SBT? Yeah. It's
what is SBT?
Science-based target.
The one I was that one.
So I ask that a lot when
That's
I talk about science-based targets.
It's a lot of
like
acronyms
this.
tonight.
Yeah, no,
that's
it's
like stopping us.
Seriously,
Let's explain all the acronyms.
The next panel discussion will be exclusively in acronyms. I ask that in a lot of rooms where I talk about science-based targets because most companies don't have science-based targets, and especially smaller companies. So if you work for somebody like Procter & Gamble, you are more likely to be a part of this movement than if you work for a smaller cap company, which most of us do. So NRG decided to set a science-based target before the Science-Based Target Initiative was incorporated. So SBTI is an organization that's sort of a loose conglomeration of other organizations that kind of try and manage the process of SBTs. But you can just start setting an SBT. You don't have to talk to SBTI to do it. It helps if you have access to the protocol. The idea is look at how your sector, this is how we did it, look at how your sector is part of the problem, quantify that, figure out what your piece of that is, figure out what you would need to do to reduce it to get to where we need to get in order to keep global temperature rise under 2 degrees Celsius. That was at least the process in 2014. We did that because it aligned with our own goals as a company and aligned with our business. So we had essentially already said we need to figure out how to decarbonize. This is not a workable situation, how much we are emitting as compared to our entire sector, as compared to the world, as compared to the carrying capacity of the atmosphere. And then in 2015, SBTI came out and said, like, hey, everybody, come and set your science-based targets. And we said, do we get extra credit? And so we got to be one of the first 10, which was great because at that point, our investors and our other stakeholders had started asking, which is the other reason that we did it. They essentially said, hey, can you tell us how you're going to, like, in a world where there's a price on carbon, for instance, in a world where we're watching global warming actually occur, can you tell us how you are going to continue to provide us with safe and affordable power while not destroying everything that we're all here to enjoy? So that was a way for us to do that very publicly. It's since gotten pretty complicated with the IPCC report saying, hey, 2 degrees, probably not enough. Like, we're going to need to look at a 1.5 degrees Celsius world. So everybody in the SBT land said, uh-oh, but now we've got to redo this whole thing. At the moment, there isn't a central decarbonization protocol that works for the power generation industry. So we're a little bit floating in space as to, we're gonna have to make this up ourselves. We're not gonna be helped by an external protocol. We are working on it because A, it matters to us, and B, it's important to our stakeholders, as I said. Also really excited about the trend toward SBTs around things other than climate. So we aren't there yet because we're still grappling with the 1.5 degree piece, and as I mentioned, our direct emissions are our most urgent impact, but we're looking at what it would be to start to look at an SBT on water.
Interesting. We are really at time so that we can take your questions, but I just want to ask you one more thing.
I'll be brief.
Yes, please be brief. But can you tell us just a little bit more about the process of deciding to commit to those as a large corporation and what it took to get your company there?
Sure. It took 18 months of intensive work with our board and our internal stakeholders to get them to agree that this was the direction that NRG should go, and to convince them that sometimes you don't know how to get to what you're saying you're going to do. So we set a goal to reduce our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions 50% by 2030 and 90% by 2050. And we're looking at maybe moving those up now. Sneak peek. But the issue was that our board and our other stakeholders internally, they're not going to be around for 2050. 2050 is like, what? How are you going to get there? And what's it like? Wait, what is that? Like, I'll be dead kind of thing. And they didn't feel real comfortable about setting a goal that was going to happen so far after they were going to have the direct responsibility and accountability to deal with it. So we had to kind of like have a little bit of a moonshot conversation and say, like, sometimes you just don't know how you're going to get there, and you're going to figure it out as you go. We had a direct sight line to the 2030 goal, and so that was pretty clear, but the 2050 goal, we still have a little bit of a, like, we've got multiple pathways, multiple scenarios, but there's a lot of technology that still needs to happen for us to get there.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. Questions? Please, feel free to. Sure, yeah, I'll take it.
You can go back. Thank you.
Great question. Dylan, do you track greenhouse gas emissions for clean power akin to what you do for conventional power?
So, depends on what you mean by clean power. So,
pollution-free that you mentioned.
Sure.
Renewable sources,
So,
solar, wind.
our renewable electricity that we sell, how to phrase this? The answer is we assume that generally renewable sources like solar and wind are carbon-free. We understand that that is a generalization, and that of course in the embodied energy that comes to you in those from those sources, there is carbon and there are other impacts. But for the purposes of using the greenhouse gas protocol, we're essentially applying a 0 to each of those. Because the way we calculate our greenhouse gas emissions from generation that comes from fossil fuels is literally, it does not include like the supply chain of coal, or it's literally what comes out of the tailpipe of a plant. So that's the sort of short answer. It can get really complicated, so I just wanted to acknowledge that there's that complexity there that we're aware of, but the short answer is it's a 0.
Okay. For Lisa, if any, what has been the effect of ride sharing in reducing traffic congestion in Houston?
Oh. It hasn't reduced it. I think that's an interesting question, because that's a big topic with amongst my colleagues across the U.S. is that the general consensus is that ride-hailing Uber Lyft does not reduce congestion because they're basically like taxis now. And so the original intent of really filling those empty seats, they've kind of left that in the dust. Until Elizabeth told me a recent story actually about a recent Uber driver that you had who is actually kind of going back to the original model of when he takes, when he has a business trip.
Yeah, he's in medical sales.
He's in medical sales, right?
So every time he goes to call on a physician's group or something like that, he picks up a customer because he's usually traveling a longer distance.
Right, so in that model, that actually helps fix that problem because you're not just driving around aimlessly, but in general, ride-hailing does not help with the traffic congestion issue. It is also interesting because, working with students, you're having this next generation of the Gen Zers who don't want to drive, who don't have driver's license, and I've met many students who are in that group, and so you do have that issue of like, how do you manage that? So we'll see what happens, but in general, yes, it doesn't help. Sure.
I remember seeing a graphic, you've probably seen it, I love it, and it's got 3 pictures, and each is a 4-lane road, and it's what it takes to transport 60 people in personally owned vehicles, and you just see cars just on this road as far as you can see. And then it says how many rideshare vehicles it takes to transport 60 people. And it's basically the same picture again. And then it says how much is required to transport 60 people by bus. And you just see this bus and just empty road everywhere. And it was really eye-opening.
Yeah, I mean the whole idea of like slugging or casual carpooling that happens downtown and in Houston and like in DC, that really does reduce congestion. I think there have been several apps that have tried to kind of figure out how to do that, but Uber Lyft it's just ride hailing, not ride sharing. There's a difference.
Maybe there's a wild card if once they go autonomous, maybe they figure out a way to get people to share, but
right.
If you can't make it convenient for people to share and the real sharing doesn't happen, it's not going to change it.
There's so many good questions. Y'all are the best. I don't even know what to do next. This one is, I think, interesting. I'm not sure if any of us are experts to answer the question, but perhaps someone will. What's taking place to reduce methane emissions? Thinking of Cheniere. And are we confident that we're able to track the superpollutants being released in Houston? Are we confident that we're tracking everything that's being emitted?
I am not an expert in this, but we are definitely confident that we are not tracking everything that's being emitted.
I second that.
Okay.
And there was a recent report about the Permian Basin being only tracking 50% of what's being flared. So it's a little bit of a different issue, but the reporting is very inaccurate. I'll say that without putting the blame on anyone. So yeah, it's a mess, I think, is the answer. No confidence.
Show of hands if you've seen Ice on Fire.
What is it?
Ice on Fire.
I don't know it.
Ice on Fire, that's Leonardo DiCaprio's new documentary about greenhouse gas emissions and global warming. Give it a watch.
For real.
Yeah, for real, give it a watch. There is a long segment on methane, and the documentary is really following a number of scientists around and policymakers. It was really good.
Let me ask one more to Dylan, because this is a very concrete question. And then I'll let you go at 7:03 if anyone needs to head out. So NRG operates coal power plants that are some of the largest carbon dioxide sources in the country, including a plant in Fort Bend County that is the state's largest sulfur polluter. What is NRG's timetable for retiring some of its coal plants as it moves to its 50% by 2030 science-based target?
I wish I could say tomorrow, because I am always the person when I walk into our offices, they're like, oh, it's that girl again. What I can tell you is that retiring and repowering plants has always been